Good morning, still morning. Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am Zainab Badawi, and it is my pleasure to be moderating this second focus event of the day at this landmark conference on supporting Syria and the region. And this event is going to focus on creating jobs and economic opportunities for the Syrian refugees and internally displaced people in the country, but also, very importantly, for the host communities who we know are shouldering a huge burden. And we're going to hear from various perspectives and also about what the international community can do, governments, the voluntary sector, and also the private sector. We're going to kick off with Gerd Muller, who is Germany's development minister. And Minister, this is, of course, a topic that's very close to Germany's heart, trying to create jobs and economic opportunities to ensure that people have got sustainable livelihoods. And it's looking at the medium and the long term and not just responding in a humanitarian, framework, although that is, of course, important.
Thank you for inviting me. I just arrived from last week from Dohuk, a city, 1.4 million people, and 850,000 refugees there. Can you imagine? Yeah. 23 refugee camps, children, families without perspective, without education, without income. Yes. So let me continue in German. I think that is possible.
Of course, well, you've got your headphones. It's
yes.
Channel 1.
Die Situation ist dramatisch. Ich möchte mich nicht weiter mit der Lagebeschreibung aufhalten. Sie kennen die Situation, warum wir hier sind. Aber ein paar wichtige Bemerkungen. Es geht um Syrien, inside Syrien. Und es geht um die betroffenen Nachbarländer, Jordanien, Libanon, Türkei und den Irak. Ich möchte insbesondere den Nordirak nennen, weil ich Dohuk eben erwähnt habe. Der Nordirak ist stark betroffen, steht vor einem finanziellen und ökonomischen Kollaps, Binnenflüchtlinge aus dem Irak und aus Syrien. Wir alle erinnern uns an die Jesiden aus dem Sinjar-Gebirge. Und diese Menschen brauchen eine Perspektive. Ich möchte mich bedanken bei allen Aufnahmeländern und den Hilfsorganisationen. Aber ich möchte klar sagen, ich habe das, ich sehe die Kollegen der Europäischen Kommission, das ist nicht nur eine Herausforderung für die umliegenden Länder. Deshalb sind wir hier auch nicht alleine für die europäische Gemeinschaft, sondern für die Weltgemeinschaft. Und dies hat Ban Ki-moon auch oben deutlich gemacht. Eine humanitäre Katastrophe, die vor unseren Augen abläuft. Und natürlich ist das Wichtigste, dass dieser unselige Krieg gestoppt wird. Die Situation für die Menschen hat sich die letzten Tage weiter dramatisch zugespitzt. Die Bombenangriffe treffen natürlich viele 100.000 Menschen, Zivilbevölkerung. Ich nenne das Stichwort Aleppo. Und meine Damen und Herren, wir alle sind beschämt. Sie und viele von uns haben die Konferenzen der letzten Jahre mitgemacht. Ich hoffe, dass diese Konferenz ein anderes Signal setzt. Die Pledging-Konferenz, Zusagen im vergangenen Jahr 7, noch was Milliarden, umgesetzt die Hälfte. Ich war in Dohuk in einem dieser Camps, wo mir dann die Mütter ihre Kinder zeigen und die Situation auf den Punkt bringen. Das World Food Programm wurde von $30 auf $11 reduziert. Hunderttausende wurden komplett herausgenommen. Und die Mutter fragt mich, was soll ich mit meinen 5 Kindern machen? Ihr gebt mir nicht das Nötigste, um zu überleben. Vor unseren Augen läuft eine solche dramatische Situation ab. Und meine Damen und Herren, mit 10 Milliarden, ich nenne diese Zahl unabhängig von diesem Manuskript, Mit 10 Milliarden ist die Region zu stabilisieren. Es geht um das Überleben der Menschen und dann geht es um die Frage der Ausbildung und das sollten wir uns vornehmen. Ban Ki-moon sagte, Schule, Education für alle Kinder. 50% der Flüchtlinge sind Kinder und Jugendliche, 50%. Und nur jeder Zweite hat über UNICEF und andere Organisationen die Chance, zur Schule zu gehen. Das heißt, 50% der Kindermillionen sind die letzten 5 Jahre nicht beschult worden. Es bilden sich kriminelle Strukturen und alle Probleme, die wir kennen. Ban Ki-moon sagt, für jedes Kind, das ist selbstverständlich richtig, aber nehmen wir uns reale Schritte vor. 1 Million Kinder zusätzlich in die Schule dieses Jahr, 1 Million Jugendliche in Ausbildung und 1 Million Jobs für die Erwachsenen. Wenn wir das umsetzen und nicht nur reden, sondern handeln, können wir die Region stabilisieren. Und ich möchte an der Stelle sagen, die Menschen wollen vor Ort bleiben. Sie wollen zurück auch in bereits befriedete Regionen. Ich nenne die Sinjar-Region. Die Jesidinnen sagen wir und die Jesiden, die ich besucht habe, wir haben 3 Optionen, hier zu bleiben im Camp unter diesen unwürdigen Umständen, ohne Arbeit, mit kaum Nahrung. Wir haben die Möglichkeit, wieder zurückzukehren in die Sinjar-Region oder, wenn dies nicht möglich ist, nach Europa zu fliehen. Und wir sind der Meinung, wir sollten jetzt den Wiederaufbau mit einleiten. Meine Damen und Herren, die Genfer Verhandlungen, wir hoffen alle auf Waffenstillstand. Aber wir sollten nicht auf diese Verhandlungen starren. Es gibt befriedete Zonen, wo die Menschen bereits jetzt zurückgeführt werden. Und wir müssen parallel diesen Prozess von heute, von London aus starten, mit einem Marshallplan der Stabilisierung der betroffenen Länder und Regionen. Und dazu gehören auch neue Instrumente und Hilfen zur Stabilisierung der Wirtschaft in Jordanien, im Libanon, aber auch der Türkei und im Nordirak. Deshalb begrüßen wir außerordentlich auch die Ankündigung der Weltbank, eine Initiative, Libanon, Jordanien, den Nordirak auch mit Krediten zu unterstützen. Deutschland wird seine Hilfe erheblich erhöhen. Die Kanzlerin verkündet dies oben. Wir unterstützen auch den Global Compact, selbstverständlich für Jordanien und Libanon, denn mittelfristig müssen Privatinvestitionen in diesen Ländern zur Stabilisierung beitragen. Und Deutschland bittet Sie um Unterstützung, Cash for Work, in den Camps, in den Siedlungen. Die Flüchtlinge sind Lehrerinnen, es sind Krankenschwestern, es sind Arbeiter, es sind Handwerker, die arbeiten können und wollen und ihre eigenen Dörfer, zerstörten Regionen wieder aufbauen. Und dafür wollen wir sie bezahlen. Cash for Work, 500.000 Arbeitsplätze, $300 im Monat, das schaffen wir mit 1,8 Milliarden. Und damit würden wir 500 Familien eine Zukunft geben, wieder zurückzukehren durch dieses Programm. Deutschland, mein Ministerium, wird dieses Programm auf alle Fälle umsetzen. Wir finanzieren dies an mit 200 Millionen, aber wir freuen uns natürlich auf Unterstützung. Ich glaube, das ist ein ganz wichtiger Punkt. Meine Damen und Herren, vielen Dank, dass ich diese Ausführungen hier machen durfte, dass Sie alle da sind. Dies ist wirklich ein herausragendes Zeichen. Aber ich sage es nochmal, all unsere schönen Reden, die sind nur glaubwürdig, wenn wir auch handeln. Und das, was wir zusagen, auch 2016, dann auch konkret umsetzen. Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Minister Muller, thank you so much indeed. And I will give you an opportunity at the very end to give us some closing remarks. But thank you for joining up some of the dots for us there, the holistic approach that's needed, particularly when we're talking about creating jobs and economic opportunities. And you called for a Marshall Plan, as it were, for the region. Thank you. Dina Khayyat, we had some amusing exchanges about your name, because her name in Arabic, for those of you who speak Arabic, of course, means sewing, tailor, and she is the head of the Jordanian Garment Manufacturing Association. So this is a lady who, it says what it does on the tin. But can you sew, by the way? Are you a good sewer?
No, unfortunately, no.
Nor am I, that's the secret. Anyway, you are going to tell us the importance from the employer's perspective of having a diverse labour market in the context of what we're talking about. So please, do tell us.
Jordan is a small country, but we have a big heart. We have already an influx of 1.3 million Syrian refugees in Jordan, which is around 20% of our population. And this has affected the government of Jordan as well as the citizens of Jordan. And as a private sector, I'm very proud to say that the garment sector, manufacturing of clothes, has been a success story in Jordan. And we would like to take this opportunity to start here by creating jobs for both Jordanians as well as Syrian in this sector. Just to brief you, this sector is the highest employer in Jordan, employing around 60,000 workers. We are the highest and #1 of exporter from Jordan. We do export to the US market. In 2014, we have reached $1.3 billion. And in 2015, we have increased around 10%. And a gradual 10% increase since the past 15 years, as well as 10% increase in employment. The sector has been working in several locations in Jordan under industrial estates, belongs to the government as well as private sector. Also, we have what we call satellite units, which is branches for these factories that employ 100% Jordanians. Out of the 60,000 employees, we have 70% female workers, out of which 30% are Jordanians. And we would like to increase this percentage yearly. One of the major things that we are expecting, that we are willing to expand our facilities, our factories, if we have the chance with an open market, different new markets. As we have, the borders have closed between Iraq, Syria, and a lot of industrial sector in Jordan is suffering because we cannot export to all the neighboring countries. We have several FTAs Jordan has signed. That's why we hope that new markets open up, and especially the EU markets for the industrial sector, especially the garment. We are willing to invite European brands and department stores to come to Jordan, visit and see the potential that is available under a label made in Jordan. We are inspected by ILO. The sector is inspected by ILO under a program called Better Work Jordan, where we have a decent working condition. And we have inspection from also the government, health department, Ministry of Labor, where we inspect basically the working condition of all the workers. Our request is to open up new markets, especially the European market, and this will give us a boost and another expansion of the current existing factories their message is that they are willing to sell and, of course, willing to create job opportunities immediately. And this will give us a chance to create jobs for both Jordanians as well as Syrians. Our request is work permit. They have to be legal. So we have to work with to have a support from the donors to pay for the work permit, residency, and health permit, as well as we need transportation because these refugees come from different areas and we need to bring them to the factories. So we need donors to support also the transportation. Also the training, which is 3 months training in order to upgrade and do the efficiency of the labor and make them skilled. So we need also, we're asking for salaries of first 3 months of training. And then we are willing to, jobs are there and they are immediate jobs, and this is what we need. I think I covered everything.
Well, it sounded pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. We just, as a private sector, we have other industrial, in Jordan we have 10 industrial sectors. It includes food, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and all the industrial sector is willing to create jobs immediately if, again, we open the new markets, especially the European. Another sector is very important to consider: agriculture, construction, commercial, and retail. These are also can create jobs, immediate jobs.
Thank you very much indeed, Dina Khayyat. Thank you for giving us you know, an overview there of the sectors and what you would be looking for. We have another perspective from Jordan, the Minister for Planning and International Cooperation, Imad Fakhoury, and we were at the earlier focus event on education, of course, Minister, and this is the continuation really of that conversation, because there's no point just educating refugees and also members of the host community, children who need help. You need to be able to provide jobs and economic opportunities, both for the benefit of your own economy. And just to reiterate the figure for those of you who weren't here this morning, Jordan, a country of 9.5 million with about 1.3 million Syrian refugees, and 90% of those are not in refugee camps but actually in the country, and so that presents a huge economic challenge for you. Please give us your views on what opportunities you believe exist and what you want from the international community.
Thank you, Zainab. And building on my counterpart, Minister Muller, I think let's very quickly put the scale and the context again to the concept of a potential Marshall Plan, and to say Jordan is working on a mini Marshall Plan that allows us to transform, to do a full paradigm shift on how we deal with the refugee crisis. But it's important that you understand the scale. For Jordan, the 19% to our population is like 100 million going into the EU in 3 years. 100 million. Understand that this is the 6th year. At best, last year, our response plan was covered in commitments by 35% only in terms of what we did with the refugees, host community needs, and government services that have been provided and the costs we have been incurring. And out of those, only 60% materialized really. We're still waiting to see whether the rest actually materializes in commitments. So take a country like Jordan that has been in the past 5 years growing at 1/3 real economic growth of the prior 5 years before it, which means our host communities have increasing unemployment, increasing poverty. We had to, given all these circumstances, close the borders with Syria, with Iraq, disruption of trade routes. We lost 10% of our exports, 8% of our export last year, 10% of tourism is down, just so the public understands here what's at stake. And we had increasing poverty and unemployment amongst our own population. The true heroes are not the government of Jordan, it's actually the people of Jordan, because they have been very patient, they have been very accommodating, and of course with them, the true heroes are the refugees themselves, and I don't want to belittle that. So the cost has been tremendous, but we are at a saturation point. So you leave a country like Jordan, even though we successfully implemented a recent IMF program and commended by Madame Lagarde on implementing difficult reforms, cancelling subsidies and many things in the past 4 years, we end up with a debt to GDP of 91%, which is the only time we had our debt increase since almost 20 years, where we had a declining trajectory up to 2010, up to 55%, and starting in 2011, it started to rebuild back up, not because we were mismanaging our economy, just because the burdens were tremendous, and we commend the generosity of the international community, but unfortunately, the needs have been outpacing all of that. Add to that the 90% of the refugees being outside the camps, 90% of them now are below the poverty line of Jordan. So the refugees are also saturated. They're losing hope. So the 1.3 million in Jordan are potentially started to take death trips through Syria to find hope and dignity in Europe or somewhere else. Imagine a mother that takes a decision to go through Syria, leaving Jordan, and they're grateful to what we do, but at the same time, there is a limit to how much more we can do when we've exhausted our fiscal stability, and they make that decision to take boats and go through conflict areas just to end up with better hope somewhere in Europe. What we did is, as Jordan, we realized that this is a critical historical juncture. Either we fail and we all let each other down, and we actually jeopardize the future of Jordan and our own citizens, or we are bold enough to propose to the international community a new approach built on 3 pillars. The first is turning the refugee crisis into an economic opportunity. This has the potential, as my colleague Dina from the private sector had said, to try to use trade, investment, and special development zones to create new economic opportunities for Jordanians as well as Syrian refugees, but in a manner that doesn't displace Jordanians and that expands the economic pie of Jordan. Because even European countries would refuse, and they're much wealthier than us, that they are creating jobs or integrating people at the expense of their own citizens. So remember Jordan's development level in that regard. The potential of the US agreement, which when we signed the FTA, that had helped us go from 70 million to 1.3 billion over 10 years of exports, I want to compare that with what happened with the EU association agreement, which is almost a free trade agreement with Jordan, where Europe expanded its exports from $1 billion to $4.5 billion into Jordan. And we stayed at 200 to 250 millions of exports from Jordan into Europe. I think that shows that there is a serious restriction in the agreement, and we have been working with our colleagues in Brussels and our European partners within the approach of further integrating the Mediterranean with Europe to deal with also, if you don't do more at the source, you're going to continue to experience these tremendous migration flows for economic or political or security reasons that will want to go and find a better future. So I think it's less costly if we do more in the south, and hence our approach, we are knocking on Europe and the international, on the doors of Europe and the international community. Open up your markets a little bit further to help us create more jobs for our own citizens as well as the refugees, whilst we have 2 supporting pillars under this approach to fund adequately the response plans of Jordans, where we provide services to refugees, host communities, and not lose our macroeconomic stability. And finally, help us that you don't penalize us as an upper middle income country that is being affected by crisis, that we get more access to concessionary financing, since we have been forced to borrow to deal with the repercussions that are not of our own doing. So please understand that this is a critical juncture, and I hope that the international community will not let us down. And there's a critical role for the private sector, especially those also in Europe, to think more boldly and think of investing more in the south. That's good for their business, it's lower cost, and it helps integrate our 2 regions together and help us move forward in that. So I challenge also the private sector in Europe, with the support of the MDBs and IFIs, like our good friend Sir Suma from EBRD and our colleagues in EIB, the World Bank, IFC. Let's push the engine of the private sector in a visionary win-win approach to also take advantage of us putting these development zones at the disposal of the private sector, to be supported, as Dina said, in the areas they need help as private sector, they need partnerships, they need joint ventures, and we, the government, are committed to allow both new Jordanian jobs and Syrian jobs to be created, that ultimately also help us to incubate the post-conflict economy of Syria, to help us accelerate, keep the Syrians close to their home, so they go back and build their own countries, and we have a role in helping them accelerate the stability and the stabilization of these countries. Thank you.
Minister Fakhoury, thank you very much indeed for your for your very frank and robust comments there. And indeed, of course, King Abdullah of Jordan has spoken about the potential catastrophe and talked about the dam is about to burst. And so really the gauntlet's been thrown to countries such as the United Kingdom. Sajid Javid, you are the Secretary of State for Business, Innovation and Skills here in the UK, and the potential for the private sector and business and, you know, wanting to have open markets and so on. You recently went, Secretary of State, a couple of weeks ago, to Jordan with a business delegation here from the UK. What is your response to the challenge that's been thrown down there by Minister Fakhoury?
Good, and thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And as you say, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I took a delegation, and then also very recently in Davos, Britain also hosted with Her Majesty Queen Rania another business delegation, much broader from across the world. And before I talk about that trip, I guess, drawing on my experience, not just as a minister for the last few years, but maybe even more so as someone who worked in international business for 20 years before that, is really to recognize up front that there's a lot that, yes, that governments can do, whether they're in Jordan or they're in Lebanon or elsewhere in the region or they're in Europe, and multilaterals to create a better environment for businesses. But at the end of the day, whatever environment that is created, the business, whichever business it is, whatever area it operates in, it has to make a profit. That is not to say businesses don't have a heart, they don't show compassion. There's many, many examples of that. But if you want long-term, sustainable jobs and opportunities, they have to make a profit. Because every business has shareholders. Shareholders are looking for a return. And if you want proper, sustainable jobs, profit is going to be key. And so that means that none of us, whether it's me or whether it's Jordan or Germany, none of us can mandate a business and say, you must go there and create jobs. We can't command them. But we can certainly work with businesses to show them where that environment exists, and if it doesn't, what changes we can make. And that's why I took a delegation. It turned out to be, in the end, when we extended to the offers here in the UK to British businesses, mostly British-based multinationals, it was a delegation of about a dozen companies. It was the largest business delegation to Jordan that Britain had ever taken. And it was extremely good in showing what those opportunities were. But in particular, one part of the trip where we went to one of these industrial zones that Dina had mentioned earlier called Irbid. And it's an industrial zone that's been in place for a number of years, well over a decade now. And what was particularly interesting was this, not just to see the international companies there, the high-quality products they're making, not just in garment industry, but electronics and others, but to hear that when the trade agreement that Jordan had with the US was changed, was it 2003 or 2004, around then, it was changed so that the rules of origin requirement, so it was lowered to around 25%, so it's halved. Business within just a couple of years boomed with the US, over $1 billion in just a few years, and that generated in turn thousands of jobs. And I know before my trip and since then especially, the EU has been looking at this, and we will hear more from the EU High Representative later today at this conference. But it shows you a very practical way, I think, how governments together can act and make a real difference, and then how business will respond. And for me, what was most encouraging, that with these businesses that I went, that they were quite clear that if these kinds of changes could happen, they would absolutely seriously look at investing. I know many of them are already planning based on assumptions that things might change, and that in turn will attract more business. And it can work in Jordan, it can work in Lebanon, and perhaps elsewhere. But this is, I think, a really practical way for us sort of collectively to think out of the box, to be creative, to come up with progressive solutions, and not just think about the other ways, which are hugely important, which is aid and providing, whether it's food and education. That is hugely important. But sustainable solution, I think, requires the involvement of business. And I think we have something big right now within our grasp, but it's going to require everyone here at the conference today to really sort of to think creatively and to really go for something special. But I think with the businesses here today, that is absolutely possible, and I urge everyone to look at this seriously.
Thank you very much indeed, Secretary of State. Thank you. Clearly somebody liked what you said. Thank you very much indeed on the role of government in creating a kind of, environment in which business-led development can flourish. May I just ask from the floor if we have Gunter Petrasch with us from Siemens? We do. And do we have Guy Ryder from the ILO? Okay, good. Fine. But in fact, I'm going to go to Rami Aswan first, who is from the Lebanese Foreign Ministry. Rami, so you've heard what's said, and if you could please just all keep your comments very brief and focus very much on this creation of, sustainable jobs and how we can encourage this to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely, Lebanon's coming to this conference with a vision, an integrated vision, but I'm going to share with you part of this vision, which is a program that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lebanon has put together and is trying to push forward with the support of the private sector. The program is actually in line with Lebanese traditions, which are very dear to us and to all of us. It's innovation, creation. It's a program which safeguards the entrepreneurial spirit, which has made Lebanon become what it is. It is oriented towards the private sector, bringing the private sector to support, boosting the Lebanese economy, and therefore creating jobs for Lebanese and for Syrians as well. It's a market-oriented and market-driven project, and overall, it upholds the sense of humanity, which has been the trademark of the Lebanese government and people in dealing with the mass influx of Syrian refugees over the last 5 years. STEP, the Subsidized Temporary Employment Project, is a 3-year project and has 3 goals. The first goal is to boost the economy through financial and non-financial services. It is a sort of incentivizing the investment in small and medium enterprises in Lebanon. The second goal is through generating this economic growth. We believe that those small and medium enterprises will be able to generate job opportunities for all. They will generate job opportunities for permanent employments for Lebanese, and they will also generate temporary jobs for Syrian workers that will enable them to return to Syria and contribute not only to the pacification of their country, but also to the development of Syria. The third goal of STEP is actually to create the conditions for those Syrian workers to be able to go back to Syria with some kind of saving to invest back in Syria. It's not only providing the workers with the necessary skills, it's not only bridging the gap between Lebanese private sector and potential Syrian private sector, but it's also giving the means, the financial means, through a special fund for Syrian returnees to be able for them to invest back in Syria and therefore contribute to a sustainable development in their country. STEP will be the kickoff of the Subsidized Temporary Employment Project is scheduled in 2016, and as I said, it will last for 3 years. We are expecting in a low scenario to the creation of 50,000 jobs, and a high scenario, the creation of 100,000 jobs over the coming 3 years. Finally, these jobs will be nothing, this project will be nothing if the private sector does not support us. And for the private sector to support us, we need also governments to be standing behind us. We need to review with our partners some rules of origins. We need to review with our partners some of the trade barriers that are penalizing Lebanon these days. And we rely on all our partners to boost the standards of our production. We hope that with projects that are involving the government and with these kind of small projects, but very ambitious, we will be able to cope with the repercussions of the mass influx of Syrian refugees and therefore build peace not only in Lebanon, not only in Syria, but in the region and consequently bring stability to Europe and to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rami Aswan, on telling us the steps that the Lebanese are taking with your STEP programme and telling us what the letters stand for. And I should say that yours, again, is a country of 4 million with about 1.4 million Syrian refugees, in addition to the 500,000 Palestinian refugees your country has hosted for many years. Thank you. Gunter Petrasch, you are the Senior Vice President for Government Relations at Siemens. So, oh, you're there. Yes, thank you. if you would be so kind as to give us just a brief comment, minute or two maximum. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind invitation, as we all understand the critical nature of that discussion and the role that business plays. So Siemens is a global powerhouse focusing, as you probably know, on electrification, automation, digitalization. So I'd like to reflect a bit on this. So we somehow active in the high technology sector, and we have a long tradition for socially responsible engagement. We start a talk. I would like to let you know the Siemens Foundation is about to donate a mobile hospital for one of the refugee camps, because we see this as an urgent need to help to stabilize the fierce local situation, as there are basically no healthcare services at all right now, at least in that camp. So talk started, temporarily halted due to that conference, but we convinced that we go through that project together with the Ministry of Health and the Office of the King of Amman. So we're really happy and proud to be able to help. As I said, we are in the energy sector. What we see when it comes to competitiveness and to attract investment, energy infrastructure is a vital need. If you don't have electricity, if you have blackouts, how can you produce? And when it comes to infrastructure, of course, telecommunication and all rightly mentioned transport is vital. You need to transport your goods. Well, as you asked me to be brief, yeah, I would leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. That was, again, reiterating the need to create the right kind of environment. Thank you very much indeed. European Union Commissioner for Regional Policy, Johan Hahn. 2 minutes. What's the EU doing for job creation? Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting us. First of all, to be brief and to be clear, we will respond to the call of today for an increased pledge by mobilizing over 2 billion euros from the EU budget for the next 2 years, which means doubling the efforts compared to last year in Kuwait. But it's always about how to use this money, and this was addressed also by Minister Muller and others. I think we have to be clear. One element is, of course, to have to invest in education, but it's also about creating jobs and contributing to growth opportunities in the region. I had the opportunity to visit Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon last week and to have many discussions with colleagues on the ground. I also had the opportunity to visit, for instance, a very, I think, emblematic project in Amman, the Luminous campus, which is providing vocational training. And in Jordan, in Lebanon, like in Europe, we are facing the same challenge, a lack of skilled labor workforce. There are a lot of academics being jobless, but there is a lack of engineers, technicians, etc. And I think also this is an area where we should use the money to invest in education, in targeted education in terms of vocational training, and for that to provide the necessary support also for those companies who are ready to invest in the country. Because if you invest, you need people on the ground which you can hire, because you're not coming with a full plane of people. In that respect, we welcome the Jordan response plan and the Lebanon crisis response plan. And once again, the EU is committed to contribute actively to their implementation. May I say, we are also interested and supportive when it comes to change regulations and things like that, and to improve the contractual arrangements. But here we need, may I be frank and blunt, sometimes more precise requests, what is really demanded, what is really needed, and not to stay only with keywords. But I think we have started to cooperate, and there are these compacts which will go beyond the traditional assistance in terms of our cooperation, using the full range of the EU policy tools to promote host country economies and to help create jobs in exchange for commitments on social and economic inclusion of Syrian refugees. So this is exactly also part of our revised neighborhood policy. And this is why, for instance, we are responding to a Jordanian request, and it was already mentioned by the colleagues from Jordan and UK, to grant a special arrangement on these rules of origin, which we hope can help to provide new jobs for Jordanians and Syrian refugees. We understand that in order to attract serious investments, a time perspective of 10 years is a reasonable one. With this in mind, the Commission will propose a respective arrangement which will include a midterm evaluation after 5 years, and I hope our member states agree with our proposal. But may I also use this opportunity to say it's not only about the trade relation between Europe and the region. I think more should be done in terms of development, trade relations in the region itself, because the region is the least developed region in the world, may I say, and I have understood there are a lot of legal and unlegal, if you say, informal trade barriers between countries, and this is something we should address.
Thank you.
To be short, I would also highlight and really commend that the fact that now the countries have started to open the labor market for Syrian refugees is another important issue. Same applies, by the way, for Turkey. But I would not like to conclude without saying we should not forget in all these efforts the Palestinian refugees, and therefore we need also the necessary financial support. Last comment, I'm happy that this conference for the first time is looking into a multi-annual perspective and not only an annual one, which I believe is important for the development of the region, in particular when it comes to support for education, where we can't think in an annual perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You asked for a precise request. I make a precise request now that 2 minutes should remain 2 minutes maximum for the remaining speakers. I indulged you, Commissioner, because you speak for 30 nations, and so thank you very much indeed for your comments. But please, I've got very little time left. For those of you who have been elected to speak, I will stand when your time is up. Imad Fakhoury, you are CEO of Petrofac. You are yourself a Syrian refugee based in London, extremely successful. Very briefly, please.
I'm not a refugee. I've been here for many years. I'm
sorry,
British as well.
originally I was told.
Yeah, I'm originally Syrian, thank you. I think I want to just mention, I'm also chairman of the Asfari Foundation, and I'm here in my capacity as chairman of the foundation. We're doing quite a bit of work. One thing that has not been mentioned here is Turkey. And I'm keen to mention it because more than half the refugees are in Turkey. And a lot of the refugees in Turkey came from the north, from Aleppo. I actually lived there, I was brought up there. And that was the industrial heartland. And I want to talk about just one example of a Turkish businessman, a Syrian businessman, because we've been looking at supporting SMEs in the south. This one guy, his name is Hussam Tatari, with $250,000, he created a business with 50 employees, mostly Syrians. He's up to 200 employees right now, 120 Syrians, that is making money. And he brought me a study where for $30 million, he could put 10,000 refugees to work. He's in the garment industry. And guess who his client is? Versace. So he's exporting to Versace in Italy from Syria. And he said for 10,000, he can put 10,000 people to work with $30 million. Now, I've looked at the numbers. In Turkey, the number of Syrian-owned businesses have gone up from 30 to 2,800. And the export from southern Turkey to Syria has gone up to about $1.4 billion. But there are 10,000 firms working in Turkey under the radar screen, not paying proper wages, abusing their workers, and because they're not licensed, and they have no proper permitting to work. So to me, and obviously they are lacking funding, they need funding, so SME funding. One of the things we're looking at in our foundations is how can we support some of these SMEs to help them work. But we do need the support. I mean, this is a point I raised with Davutoglu, with the Prime Minister, about the 10% limit for the Syrians at work.
The Turkish Prime Minister,
yeah. Turkish Prime Minister. But when you talk about the South, you can do this. Just one last very quick comment I need to say, that for foundations like ours working in Syria, the banking restrictions in this country are amazing. We can't operate. We can't send to the local NGOs. It's impossible, and we find that right now getting money to the country is very difficult. And I want to have a plea for the British government that if you are incorporated and monitored and under the UK-British Commission, how can RBS not transfer money for us? We can't transfer money.
Sounds like you need a bilateral.
Absolutely, no, but I think this is something that all the charities that are operating in Europe are suffering from. They can't use the proper banking system in these countries. Thank you.
Eamon, thank you very much indeed. And yes, and of course I should have said, originally of Syrian resident immigrant, not refugee. I do beg your pardon. Thank you very much indeed. Guy Ryder from the ILO, International Labour Organization. Just very briefly on the importance of quality work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I think any country that's hosting significant numbers of refugees knows the complexity and sensitivity of providing access to labour markets. That sensitivity becomes all the greater when the numbers are taken into consideration proportionately, and the fact that these labour markets are already under stress is also accounted for. Let's start from the reality. Large numbers of Syrians are already working in Jordan, in Turkey and the Lebanon. More than half of Syrians living outside camps in Jordan are working. They're working informally, they're working illegally, and they're working in ways which are putting downward pressure on wages and working conditions in Jordan, which tests the tolerance and generosity of the people of Jordan, and I think the same applies to the other countries we're considering. So the challenge is twofold. The challenge is to open up legal and orderly avenues into the labour markets for Syrian refugees, and to do that in a way which is and is perceived as being a win-win for refugees and for the local host populations. Easy to say, difficult to do. How to do? Well, two ways seem to be open to us. One is, and Dina has referred to it, expanding the opportunities provided by the qualified industrial zones. We have 20 years of experience with those zones. The ILO has been working in them for over 8 years. Let's be clear, incentives may be needed, financing, etc., market access, but it won't be enough, because our experience in those zones show that unless you pay real attention to how to craft the nature of work and the employment conditions in those zones, they won't work. This is a bumpy ride. And so I would just say, and we get the message from the private sector round table, decent work is a deal breaker for businesses wanting to invest. That's one avenue. The second avenue, and I finish with this, and Minister Muller has already led us down this road, employment-intensive investment programs. I was in Malfrak in Irbid, sitting with the local economic development committees, Jordanian leaders, designing these types of programs for Syrians in a way which is to the benefit of local communities and the refugees. We're talking road building, we're talking irrigation, we're talking water conservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Ryder. George Soros from the Open Society Foundation. Just a minute, please, really, because otherwise I have to release my panel for their next sessions. So if you'd be so kind as to very briefly, please. Thank you.
I'd like to point out an additional pressure that is facing Lebanon and Jordan, and that is that the Russians are still bombing the civilian population, and they are fleeing because of barrel bombs and even chemical bombs. And so you have got 20,000 Syrian refugees waiting to be admitted to Jordan, and a somewhat smaller number to Lebanon. So that's an additional problem. And to relieve that pressure, the European Union should take 3 specific measures for Jordan. I'll focus on Jordan here, that would relieve that pressure. First of all, they should modify the bilateral trade agreement with Jordan to conform to the agreement that Jordan has with the United States. You have heard that exports to the United States have expanded twice as fast as to Europe. And this could be remedied by 2 measures. One is to modify the local content to conform to the one that the United States has required. And second, to extend the duration of the program, not to 10 years, but to 15 years, to justify build for multinationals and local entrepreneurs and Syrians to build new factories So those two are essential steps. The second is Jordan, through no fault of its own, has increased its debt burden from 67% in 2010 to 90% today. And official lenders should therefore provide temporary debt relief by reducing the interest rate and delaying the repayment of principals on existing loans. This would enable Jordan to use its limited borrowing capacity to benefit refugees and Jordanians alike. Third, the EU should help to pay for the education of Syrian children, because the lack of adequate education facilities is the #1 reason refugees give why they want to go to Europe. And by the way, that same applies to Lebanon. So let me take this occasion to announce that my foundation is launching a major program to train Syrian and local paralegals in Jordan and Lebanon. They will help refugees to obtain work permits and other documents, contact their families, and help them in many other ways. Thank you.
Thank you for your pledge for building legal capability to create a better business environment. Thank you very much indeed for that announcement, George Soros. Panel, fortunately, you can relax just for a few minutes because the plenary is slightly running over, which means you don't have to march off the stage just yet. Lilian Plowman, you are the Minister for Development and Cooperation and Foreign Trade for the Netherlands. Very briefly, if you'd be so kind.
Of course, yeah. And the Netherlands is also the EU president, so the true speaker in the name of 28 countries. I just wanted to make a few comments on trade policy and what the EU can do. And very happy, of course, to hear what the Commission has already proposed. We will continue to work with the Commission and the other member states to look for temporary modification of the rules of origin. We will urge the Commission to start the negotiations on deepening the current association agreement, as was requested by my friends. We will also work with them to look into granting additional quota for specific products that are relevant to your markets, flowers, olive oil. We will encourage the WTO to be sympathetic to the extension of a waiver regarding Jordan's export subsidy program into 2018. And if there's such a program for Lebanon, we will obviously encourage WTO membership to do that also. Then on behalf of the Netherlands, we have very much advocated for concessional loans by the development banks, and of course we will be able to also pledge additional contribution of 10 million from the Netherlands to that concessional program that was launched in April. So we're working on it.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us in your dual capacity there. Thank you very much indeed. As my time has slightly expanded, so has my list of speakers. I am now informed, and I do apologise, I do not have the name, the Minister from Sweden. If you would be so kind as to stand and introduce yourself, Madam. I didn't even have the gender. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry for being
the first woman what? To speak? No, we've had other women speaking. Yeah, we did. We just had a woman. Yeah. Minister, wake up. No, I'm joking. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I'm sorry for being a little bit late from the introductory ceremony to join you.
Thank you. I just wanted... If you would introduce yourself,
Margot Wallström, I'm the Foreign Minister of Sweden.
Thank you.
Maybe I could just add one thing, and that is we have in the Swedish government adopted a new 5-year development cooperation strategy for Syria. And it's the first time that we try to adopt this multi-year, regional, more strategic development approach to the Syria crisis. And I hope that it can serve as an inspiration for others as well. it will mean $200 million for the years until 2020. And this is, of course, to complement the humanitarian assistance, because, as we know, that will not suffice. And we are trying to find innovative ways to strengthen the resilience. So I would say that resilience is really the lead word in this strategy, and also include host communities in neighboring countries. And our analysis is, of course, that jobs are fundamental to this end. We also think that this will reduce dependence on very negative economic coping mechanisms, such as paid recruitment to armed groups, including terrorist groups, forced marriages, kidnapping and smuggling. And we hope that instead it will build hope for the future, competence for reconstruction, and improve the prospects of sustainable peace. We look forward to working with Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey to provide jobs for refugees from Syria in locals in host communities. And I think it's very good that we have the Jordan Compact, that we have these new ideas of turning it into something very practical and practical instruments. And we support that, and we hope that this will complement what is already being done, start to look long-term. And at the same time, my impression is that it is a bit, should we call it schizophrenic? Because we are sitting here discussing all these excellent ideas. We are pledging money, and at the same time, the reality on the ground is just deteriorating. And the war is going on, and people are being bombed the same minute we're here. So it feels a bit, I don't know how to capture that sentiment, but that's at least my feeling right now, although we have to be constructive, continue to be constructive. Maybe this is a model for others as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Wallström. I think you captured that very eloquently there. Thank you very much indeed. Just one more speaker, really, from the floor. Mazen Darwaza, Hikma, from Hikma, which is a Jordanian company. Thank you.
Thank you. We're a Jordanian company, roots, now we're a global company. I want to give you a perspective. Our Minister of Jordan touched on it. The problem in Jordan today is the magnitude. And throughout Davos, when we met, we discussed this, and now through this conference, the problem is much bigger than what is being discussed here today. I'll give you a very small example. We have 300,000 Syrian students going to schools and competing with Jordanian, 150,000 every year go to schools. The Jordanian children now have to go to 3 shifts in order to accommodate the classes for all of these. So the magnitude that Jordan is taking, the pressure on the people is really becoming tremendous. And like Minister Muller said, the integrity of Jordan, keeping it sustainable, is quite important. Because if Jordan bursts, imagine what the outflux will be to Europe. It will be a magnitude of a disaster that's going to come to Europe. So the sustainability of Jordan today is what should be spoken about. And how can we support this country? Because everything is going thin, from our water resources, our labor force, our healthcare system, our education, and our business. But going back to profitability, Jordan is a great country to invest in. Just by having the tax laws in Jordan will really bring back the sustainability of the business that has been invested. So I would really plea for everyone today to look at the magnitude of the problem of Jordan and keep it as the last oasis in that part of the world. Because if that oasis dries up, you're going to have major problems coming to this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mazen Darwaza. So, Minister Muller, we heard that Mazen Darwaza and indeed the Swedish Foreign Minister, Margot Wallström, talking about time is of the essence, really. So whatever the plans and the key ambitions that we have, they have to be realised very quickly. So perhaps you could just really conclude this session for us. I know you're going to be attending the plenary and so on, and what kind of message you would wish to convey.
So,
thank you.
First of all, let me thank you, especially you. And secondly, I'm convinced, after this discussion, a lot of very interesting initiatives. I'm convinced we need a coordinator to coordinate all these very important and interesting initiatives. And I think the EU should go ahead to take responsibility. Who else? The European Commission, leadership by this. And Mr. Hahn, you as a commissioner, maybe you are the best man to do it, to go ahead and to take a responsibility to coordinate this Marshall Plan and to implement all these initiatives. I think that should be the message. If we agree, we appoint him.
Commissioner?
We are saying with pleasure. I hope it stays also tomorrow.
You have many witnesses. It's a deal, I think. Thank you all very much indeed for attending this focus event. Thank you for your contributions on the floor. For those of you going to the plenary, it's on the 3rd floor. There'll be staff to help you get there. Thank you very much indeed to my panel. Thank you. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.